here we are. Welcome to the Crave Show with Chris and JRuss. We got a special guest with us tonight. I'm super excited. We got Mr. Jack Lane. How you doing, Jack?
What's up, Chris? I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Good. Very, very good. JRuss, how's it going, man?
Great.
What's been going on with you guys this past week?
Well, we're both working the same military work right now, and I've been pressuring Jack for a little while to join us on this, which I was successful, but it took a little bit of
arm twisting.
Yeah. This is
Nice.
a little bit outside of the box that I normally like to remain in, as I was telling you prior to us going live. So I don't know what it is I see in JRuss, but apparently I like him because here I am sitting in front of a computer sharing my worthless opinion with the internet.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
great.
For people that don't know who you are, Jack, tell us a little bit about you, or JRuss. If you want to give an intro, you can do that. Brag about him a little bit.
He's giving his own bio.
I know Jack from one of the Crave courses, the Crave wingsuit course. He has a little cameo in the wingsuit course.
Yeah, for sure. That's where you and I originally met, and then we partied at a couple. Well, like not like partied, but like partied in the sky at a couple of boogies.
Yeah, in San Marcos.
Ribs, San Marcos. That was fun this year. Man. My name's Jack Lane, commercial skydiver. Been doing that thing since 2010, June 10th, 2010 was my first jump. Had no real intention of being a full-time skydiver. Kind of got into it just for the prerequisite of base jumping, and then quickly saw what was actually in front of me. And it didn't take too long to turn it into full-time job. Just worked my way up the ladder, packer, all the way up to purebred commercial skydiver. And been cruising around doing that for the last 13, 14 years now.
So is that why you did your first skydive? Was really you just wanted to be able to base jump?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Prior to skydiving, I was working in the mountains, doing some rock and ice climbing guiding, backcountry skiing, kind of like just overall mountain guide. And on one day, I was taking some clients up a cliff and saw a guy do a static line base jump off the top of the cliff and fly his parachute down to the parking lot that we had hiked up from. And it was like a 2,500 foot elevation difference from the base of the cliff down to the parking lot. So like you'd have to hike the 2,500 feet over like in 2 hours to get to the base of the cliff, do the jump, rappel the cliff, and then hike the 2,500 feet back down to the car. This guy jumped off the top and just flew right back to the car. And I was like, I got to learn how to do that. I showed up at the drop zone, put $1,500 on the table, said something along the lines of, I need like 50 jumps and then I'm going to go learn how to base jump. And they all laughed at me. And
yes, rightfully so.
Yeah. And then we started the process, man.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So have you done the base jumping?
Yep. I enjoy base jumping as well.
Nice. Very cool. And where do you live right now?
Right now, I'm currently a free agent. The last 4 years, I've been based out of Washington State. But currently, due to a lot of work going on and being on the road for the last couple of months, I ditched my apartment up there and just been on the road, bouncing from contract to contract and picking a new place to call home base.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And when you were guiding and doing a lot of mountain stuff before you started jumping, where were you doing that all over the place, or where was that?
It was mainly up in the Northeast. As far as climbing, I used to climb all over. I mean, I'd come out to the West like a few times a year, but as far as where I was living in upstate New York, working as a mountain guide up there in the Adirondack Mountains, living in a small little mountain town called Keene Valley. And then I actually learned how to skydive at a super dope drop zone on the shores of Lake Champlain called Vermont Skydiving Adventures. Super small little Cessna drop zone, actually behind a miniature donkey farm. That's, I kid you not, a miniature donkey farm that's called Aspirin Acres. Like ASS dash Pyrans or like Aspirin Acres. So to get to the drop zone, you actually have to drive through these front gates, and there would be like hundreds of miniature donkeys just running around in these fields. And then it was a grass strip back there, no running water. They had just gotten electricity, I think, the year that I showed up.
Have you ever told Steph
Steph.
that my wife,
No.
that there's miniature donkey farm?
No.
Yeah, don't mention it. We're gonna just don't want to have miniature donkeys right after.
Yeah.
And if she's the one person in the audience, then I'm in trouble.
Not exactly the best animal to have around a drop zone, as you can imagine. Camping privileges were taken away the year prior to me showing up at that drop zone because, as you can imagine, skydivers camping out at the drop zone and there being miniature donkeys within, arm's reach was fairly fun. But yeah, dude. So learned in Vermont, spent a couple seasons up there. Got my ratings in Massachusetts, AFF rating from Al King, who used to be national director of the USPA. Al King, you're the man. It's his birthday today, by the way. Happy birthday, Big Al. Al is actually one of like the OG dudes of accelerated freefall in skydiving. The original guy who developed the accelerated freefall program, I forget his name, but Al King was like one of his second bananas. And so Al was a big proponent in spreading the method of AFF. I think it was pretty much worldwide. He traveled around and did that. So got my AFF rating from Al, and then got my tandem rating from his son, Cam King, and then started working at Jumptown in Massachusetts. That was my first turbine drop zone in 2012. Found myself in New Zealand down in 2013, 14, and some of 15.
Where were you at a drop zone?
Yeah, was working at a drop zone down there called Skydive France Joseph.
Okay, I did my first ever tandem was at Lake Taupo.
Oh, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man.
That was in 2003, and then I didn't jump again until like 2013. But that's where I did my first one.
That's awesome.
I have a VHS tape somewhere of it.
That's awesome. That's cool, man.
Sorry, keep going. I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. So sometime down in New Zealand, came back to the States, and then migrated out west. And I've been bebopping around out here. Like I said, just doing the commercial skydiving thing ever since.
Cool. So you said that the very first drop zone where you're at was what was it?
Vermont Skydiving Adventures.
And you said it was like so awesome. I mean, you almost, your face lit up almost when you mentioned it. What was so great about it? Like,
yeah, anybody who's been to that place or
what made it so great?
It's well, first and foremost, the owner, Ole Thompson, and then everything trickles down from the top. So you have the dopest dude in the world running a drop zone, then everything there is going to be the best. But I don't know, man. I guess you got to go there to find out. How about that?
Okay, there you go. Cool.
Yeah.
So have you, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but have you done a lot of coaching over the years?
Yeah, so that's been kind of like my main jam. I guess that's why I call myself as like a commercial skydiver, is because a vast majority of my jumps are instructional jumps. Over 6,000 tandems, AFF for a decade now, coaching right along with that AFF, and then wingsuit coaching and some beginner to intermediate like movement and free fly as well. But,
so what do you, I just love talking about coaching and hearing from people who have a lot of experience coaching, but also are some, are humble people. I haven't been around you a ton, but I've been around you enough to know that you're a pretty humble guy. You don't. And so what do you think makes a good coach? How can, because I really, I haven't had tons of opportunity to coach, but working in the tunnel and organizing and doing stuff at the drop zone, I have a few opportunities, and I really try to do a good job. And I'm always interested to hear from people, like, how can, whether it's me as an individual personally, how can I be a better coach? How can I help people? Or just in general, the attitude and the worldwide community of skydivers, like, how can we coach and help each other better? But specifically, like an actual coach, somebody who's getting paid to coach.
I love answering this.
You did?
Yeah, we've talked about this many times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I love asking this question. So
yeah. There's a lot. That's a lot to unpack, dude. Like, I could sit here for hours with you and talk about that.
It's an open-ended.
Yeah.
Just give me a few, maybe just a few things that come top of mind. What are the things that you think make a really good coach? Or you can say, you can come at it from the other side. Like, what are some things that you've seen coaches doing that they were not doing a good job? And of course, please don't name names.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. This is I'm super passionate about the question that you just asked. Like I really like we were just actually having a pretty in-depth discussion today at work about quality of instruction and the quality of instructors and yeah. So I guess the keys for me would be first and foremost, like you gotta check your business at the door, check your ego at the door. You know what I mean? Like if you're a coach or if you're an instructor, like if you're in that position, in my opinion, like you're in that position for a reason. You don't need to kind of like dangle that in front of the person's face. You know, they already
Mm-hmm.
know that you're better than them and that you have more experience and that you have the answers. That's why they're coming to you. So you don't need to kind of like, don't be all high and mighty, I think is pretty important. Um, and then that kind of segues into like, I think you got to be like relatable. Like you got to get to know the person. You can't just like try and take on the task or hit the target learning objective or whatever they've come to you for, before. Like I think you got to, where'd you grow up? What do you do for fun? What makes you you? Um, that way you can kind of find like a even ground or like a medium for discussion and relaying information to them.
Mm.
And then controlling your expectations, both high and low. You know, having high expectations for what they give back to you, having high expectations for yourself and what you're giving to your student, and then checking your expectations as far as what you're expecting from them as far as progress and timeline to task or to end of task.
How do you push a person to get better? Like give them the latitude and the freedom to do things that might be a little bit beyond what they're currently able to do, and show them that you believe in them, give them the trust, but also not put them in a dangerous situation and not put them in a situation where you're asking them to do something that's not wise, not safe. Is that question? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I think that's like for me that's skydiving instruction. Your friends, your family, everyone. Like I got this thing I like to say, like gas them up. It's free. You know what I mean? Gas your friends up. Like that's all you got to do. You just got to gas your student up. You know, let them know that whatever you're asking them to do is 100% within their capabilities. Especially in skydiving, more often than not in skydiving, it's just a matter of controlling our reptilian brain and desensitizing ourselves to the chaos that's around us
Hmm.
and reminding ourselves that the basics of what we're asking ourselves to do or like the fundamentals are like super simple. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. And so I guess, and then, yeah, you gotta, so as an instructor, a lot of that comes with, then we go into like delivery, you know, delivery is super important. Something Al King really hammered down on me for instruction was like a really good way is whole, part, whole, tell, show, do. I think I've found like unbelievable success with that in any aspect of teaching in skydiving or anything that you want to help someone out with, but whole, part, whole. So talking them through the whole experience or the whole event, whatever we're taking on, breaking it down into the parts and then building it back into a whole piece again so they understand the picture from a macro standpoint but also a micro standpoint. And then tell, show, do is like super important, I found as well. And that's the process of being able to tell someone how to do something and have it just be words, isolating that from being like a physical movement or you giving them an example, showing being like a separate piece, and then having them do it.
Hmm.
I've noticed like one of my bad habits in instruction is breaking down that tell and that show part. Sometimes as I'm telling people how to do something, I'll kind of start showing them how to do it, but not do it the proper way. And that can instill some poor habits, I think, when whoever you're teaching.
Yeah. What about that? That made me think, because the tell part, what I think sometimes I tend to do is over coach, over explain, over too much information. How do we kind of mitigate that and make sure we're giving enough information, we're giving the instruction, we're giving the coaching, but we're also not just, running our mouths.
Yeah, man. Self-awareness. That's something I've been working a lot over the last couple of years. Matt Gertie's one of my biggest mentors. Like when I started working with him, he pretty much just looked at me in the eyes one day and he was like, Jack, you got to shut up. Like, you're great. You're doing great. You have everything you need. It's all inside. Just a little less.
He doesn't have a problem being quiet.
No, Matt's
he is a man of few words.
Matt knows how to. I think Matt's been like a big mentor of mine and big teacher when it comes to how to be clear and concise.
Yeah. Cool. JRuss, do you have any thoughts on all that stuff or questions?
Yeah, but I'm not offering them now. This is Jack's time to shine. Oh gosh.
Well, okay. So I want to go back to something a long time ago. The AFF. You were talking about Al King, right? Isn't that what you said? That he kind of, and it sounded like what you're saying is he completely revamped that system. Is that what you were saying? The current AFF program. He completely. What was it like before that? Or what did he change? What did he do? What did he come up with that was not happening or that was different? And JRuss.
Yeah, I think JRuss might know like earlier history, but the brief of what I know is prior to that, it was mainly IAD, instructor assisted deployment, and static line.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So what I mean, I know what static line is, and I have an idea or sense of IAD, but JRuss, can you just explain that a little bit more for me?
Actually, I don't know that much about IAD, and that I don't want to talk about it too much. I did a static line, and that's still a program in smaller drop zones. But it has largely been phased out because of innovations like the AFF program, or in a very similar vein, Roger Nelson at Skydive Chicago came up with AFP, which is, at least in my experience, I'm not sure. Like I did AFF as a student. Mm-hmm. That was a 7 jump program, 2 instructors, 1 on either side of the student for 3 jumps, and then assuming passing situation. On the 4th jump, it goes down to a single instructor, and then skills that you have to perform. And then Roger took that program, made something very similar but a little bit more in depth. And I kind of like it because as a student, I did reasonably well. There was my instructor combined 2 levels, which seemed great. I saved a couple $100 on doing, I don't know, I like combined 5 and 6 or 4 and 5 or something like that. But then that meant that at jump number 6, they said, good luck. I had 6 jumps. My 7th jump was a solo. Oh, nice. And I mean, imagine that 7 jumps. So there's nobody with me.
Your 7th jump, you were completely solo?
Yeah. That's awesome. And so AFP is very similar, but it's like, it's almost to an A license where you're with an instructor or a coach, and there's a little bit more involved on the skill set, and there's canopy stuff, and it's just on in one way of looking at it, it's more expensive. You're spending a lot more money to get through the program, but then on the other hand, you've gotten a lot more information, and we're hopefully a somewhat safer skydiver, maybe.
Yeah.
Chris, do you know how? And for whoever's listening, they might not be aware, but static line and IAD instruction and progression is actually like pretty radical. I guess the idea behind it is you're guaranteeing the student a canopy or an open container. Yeah, that's what you're guaranteeing them. You're guaranteeing them an open container from the aircraft, without the need to leave the aircraft with them. And so like in static line and IAD progression, essentially the student is leaving the aircraft themselves. The container is being opened immediately by the instructor, whether it's through being connected to the aircraft via the static line system or the instructor assisted deployment method. And during those initial 3 seconds of free fall, or those brief moments that the students have, we're literally telling them like, do a practice touch, even though there's nothing back there. And then it gets to a point where you actually put a piece of newspaper back there or a banana. and you'll have them do like a fake toss to show that they can actually do it. And when they show they can actually deploy their parachute on their own, then you literally say to them like, okay, you're going to like leave the aircraft this time, but just wait like 5 seconds and then do that. And if they do okay at that, then you tell them like, okay, now you're going to go out and you're going to do a 90, and they learn it all on their own. AFF, accelerated free fall, was really just the method of exiting the aircraft, holding on to the student, being with the student for an extended period of time, and being able to work through the different free fall objectives prior to guaranteeing them an open container. And then after they started the AFF program, the USPA opened up what's called the ISP, which is the Integrated Student Program. And that allowed for drop zones like Skydive Chicago and like other places, Spaceland Dallas has the program. I believe it's called STP, the Student Training Program. Essentially, as long as all the initial boxes are checked from the accelerated freefall program that the USPA has, a drop zone is allowed to adapt the jumps to make a more comprehensive program the way that Roger did. Getting back to your original question, Al was one of the original dudes that was just like, yo, we don't have to just push these guys out of the plane. We can actually jump out with them.
Yeah, like let's go out and fly with them and hold on, make sure there's, yeah.
Al was one of the OG harness hold instructors. And I think he was the first tandem skydive in South Africa or something like that. And it was like a drogueless tandem as well, like hardcore. Yeah, Al Kane's the man. Yeah, he's a legend.
Can you imagine that opening?
Dude, imagine free fall.
I mean, have you've got drogueless.
Yeah.
Is free fall portion that different?
You get moving. Yeah.
No, I mean, I know, but like, is it more difficult to control, or is it what's it like without a drogue in the free? I didn't even think about the free fall being that much different.
Man, you just mocking. Like when I film drogueless tandems, I'm on my head and I'm going fast.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quick.
Yeah. And and then as the tandem instructor, as you can imagine, falling without a drogue, like, you're moving. You got a lot of speed.
I imagine that would be hard on your shoulders after a while.
Yeah. Too much.
Wow. So I did not realize that the IAD, the instructor assisted deployment, was from the door. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. We pull their pilot chute out in the plane. I look at the students in the eyes and I say, I have your pilot chute. That's when they go full gerbil eye. And then they climb outside the plane. And when they leave the aircraft, all I do is I throw the pilot chute underneath the plane into the relative wind.
Okay. All right.
And it deploys their parachute for them.
Yeah.
It opens the container.
Guaranteed open container.
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah. That's cool.
I mean, think about what he just said, and the way that people would learn, or maybe actually not learn.
Yeah,
dude.
Comparison to what we do now, that just sounds like
it's gnarly.
Woo! Yeah, totally gnarly. Yeah.
How did you ever progress to any? Because like I'm already blown away that we can learn with like set the tunnel to the side. Like say people who didn't have the tunnel, like you only can learn 60 seconds at a time. Yeah. And so I'm amazed at how fast people are able to progress in this sport with the limited amount of learning that we have. I mean, like I compare it to like take any other sport, golf, tennis, whatever, something difficult, and you try to learn that 60 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll never get good at it.
Oh, for sure.
But somehow people are getting good at, I mean, obviously people are utilizing the tunnel, but still, I think it's amazing what people are able to do in the sky in such, short bursts of learning. It's so cool.
Yeah.
But to your point, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to be maybe a little bit off, but the first head down record attempt, I think was in Texas. I think it was an 18-way. And I think every person on the jump had more than 10,000 skydives. And they didn't get it.
And they didn't get it.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah.
And then Root kept pushing, and they did eventually get something around that size. But then he had to petition the USPA to make a record for head down. But before tunnels, how did you get good? Well, 60 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
And somebody told you to fly like this because that was the way to do it back then.
What year was that?
98, 97, something like that.
Wild.
Yeah.
To go from 18 people, which is just like one plane, like that goes down at like Elsinore.
Oh, that's a
like,
weekend.
Yeah, like anywhere.
Yeah.
And now it's just to a 200-person breathing molecule in the air. Like, the evolution of sport is like nuts, man. But learning in skydiving, if you ever have an opportunity to sit down and talk with like old skydivers, you got to do it, man. The stories are nuts. The equipment that they used, the way that they made it happen, it's all just, it's important. It's pretty great.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an old guy out at the drop zone a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, and he was saying how he used to, on a regular basis, like all the time, he was pulling at like 1,200 feet, 1,000 feet. Like that's just what he did. And I was like, well, what's the lowest you ever pulled? And he said, I think it was like 600 feet or something. Like ridiculous.
Dude,
and that was just normal for him to pull at 1,200 feet.
Yeah, and I think that still lingers a little bit in sort of the older school jumpers, but it was different times, like what parachute was he jumping? Was he jumping like
I have no idea.
I don't know, was he jumping around?
Yeah.
That they might launch that from a tailgate today at 800 feet with military guys.
Yeah,
like, it's around.
Yeah.
And it's going to open up, and you're going to smack the ground, and that's why the D license was 500 jumps. Is it still 500 jumps? Because nobody ever made it to 500 jumps because it beat up your body so bad because you jump these crap parachutes from super low altitude. But
I think that's also a bit of like ignorance is bliss. Like early on in the sport, you don't really know what can go wrong. You know what I mean? But like, because since I've been in skydiving, we've bumped the minimum deployment altitudes up by 500 feet. Because we've learned more about like what can go wrong, and like, hey, like stacking the odds in our favor is kind of important, So maybe back then they were just smoking it to the filter because they were like,
yeah, dude,
that's what we got to do. And then after like a couple of years, they were probably like, yeah, Tommy, you could probably pull it like 1,500 feet and still be rad, Yeah.
But I've had jumpers tell me that we're breaking off too high. There's all this working time we could be using, and why are we breaking off at $5,000 or 4,500 when we could still be turning points?
Get me out of
here.
I'm
done. That's it. I mean, if my canopy does line twist, I'm going to do one revolution and lose 600 feet. I'm pulling it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, JRuss, what else did you have on your mind tonight? Because I know.
Go
ahead.
So Jack and I had a conversation. Jack is he's a guy that jumps a mutant. Mutineer. There we go.
I think that's what they call it.
And so a mutant, for anybody who's not aware, was or is a adapted harness that allows you to release the connection points, and you can correct me at any point. Release the connection points at your shoulder that are the typical attachment points for your canopy, and it has a second attachment point down at your hip. And that allows you to be in, I believe the term is supine, where you're basically seated. And people might think that they're seated in their harness the way it is, but you're not really. You're in a vertical orientation, and you might lift your legs up to achieve a seated position. But Jack's actually sitting in his harness, and the center of gravity or the attachment point lowers to his hips, and it's actually a much more efficient way to fly a wing. And so I think again, I don't want to speak too much for Jack, but owing to some of his other experiences with paragliding, as I understand it, that for some people, it's a really interesting way to fly their canopy, and it has gotten more popular. The first time I saw one of those harnesses was in Dubai in around 2010 or 11, and Vince Raffet, who's sadly no longer with us, was trying to develop it. It's a very similar interest to Jack, and he was a speed rider, a very, very competent speed rider, and liked the idea of having that attachment point down at the bottom. What's hilarious to me to see on Jack's rig are some of the things that when I saw it first on Vince, like there's a little seatbelt attachment point in the center. And I, in talking to Vince, I'm like, what are you doing with that? He's like, it's the only thing we could think of. We'll figure out something else later, but for right now it works. Yeah. And now it's what's on the production model. Anyway, it's a new way to fly. A lot of competitive canopy pilots, competitive swoopers are using it. But it's very different to a standard skydiving harness. So I wanted to talk about that. And specifically, there's a couple people at my home drop zone. Probably anybody who listens is going to have somebody at their drop zone who's wanting to try it. And there's some interesting information about possible scenarios that could come up that are maybe not intuitive, that Jack had some insights into that I was hoping that he could share with people. So yeah, that was that. I mean, that's one thing. I wrote down a few things to talk about today, but definitely I want to cover that one. So I'm gonna, with all that in mind, tell us about the Mutant.
Yeah. I'm really interested. And I think probably a lot of people are in some of the the technical aspects of how it's. I mean, I understand what JRuss is saying about the points of connection or whatever, but why does that affect the flight characteristics, or how does it affect the flight characteristics so significantly? Are you able to explain some of that technical aspect a little bit to us? I think people will be really interested in that.
Yeah, I will try my best. Not an expert on the subject, but like I'm definitely passionate about it. But I think like the biggest thing is just like the way the load is suspended from the parachute. The way the load is suspended and distributed underneath the parachute is important, and the amount of parasitic drag that's underneath the parachute. So talking about the drag first, like a standard vertical harness that any of us would be jumping, we're obviously like hanging from our shoulders. So as far as the surface area of our body that is hitting the relative wind is our entire silhouette of a human being standing up, X amount of surface area. But then if you have someone laid back in a supine position with their feet forward, kind of like they're in a reclining chair, and you were to look at them from the front, the way that the relative wind that would be hitting them, the surface area is nil compared to a vertical harness. So we're taking away a lot of drag from underneath the parachute.
Is it almost like a recumbent bike? Maybe not quite that drastic?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah,
okay,
for sure. As far as ease, for sure. Just like a recumbent bike. Put it back. Okay. And you just like, when you're on a regular bike, you're leaned forward. And so you're that's one of the things that cyclists have to deal with. But when you're on a recumbent bike, you're not creating as much air resistance. It's same.
Okay.
So it's that, the drag, but then also the way that the load is hanging beneath the canopy. In the sense of from like a profile, if you were to follow a line from chord center of the canopy straight down to where the pilot is, you have weight that is forward and aft of that center chord line on the parachute.
You're saying with the Mutant harness, you do?
With the Mutant harness. And because of that, you're able to fly the wing much more aggressively. And by aggressively, I mean in different attitudes, in the sense of being able to actually get over top of the wing. Because of science, we'll say.
Because of science, because of physics.
I mean, a thought that probably frightens most skydivers, including myself.
I do not want to go over the top of my wing.
Like a lot of, like if you're on a vertical harness and like you're doing like a barrel roll, it's kind of like a corkscrew in the sense that there's a large vertical component to it. When we're barrel rolling the Mutant harnesses, there's minimal, if any, vertical component to the roll, and it's all horizontal. So again, because of the way that load is suspended and distributed underneath the wing, you're able to get directly over top of it.
And does it also affect the inputs like side to side?
Yeah, as far as like harness input,
Right.
the harness input is through the roof compared to a regular harness.
Why is that? I'm trying to figure out in my mind why that would be so significantly different. What makes it so different?
Because if you think about like a regular vertical harness, you're hanging from your shoulder attachment points.
Okay.
And so like our on a vertical harness, your three rings attached to your shoulders, but your three rings is attached to your main lift webs, which goes down to your hip articulation points. So it's kind of like dampened, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You have that length between where the parachute is attached and then restricted by the chest strap. And then it goes down to the hip articulation point, and that's where the weight shift happens for a harness input. You're removing that section and you're attaching the parachute directly to that hip articulation point. So it's much easier to shift weight in the harness, and you're also able to shift weight, for lack of a better term at this point, back into the pocket more,
Okay.
which really
Yeah.
makes things roll over its edge.
Okay. And when you described that, like with the vertical harness with the chest strap and the container, that whole structure is much more rigid when you think about the way it's built and put together. So like actually tilting and twisting and maneuvering that rigid structure is much more difficult than one that's just two that's going back and forth and you're instantly pulling on the lines, right?
Yeah, you definitely, yeah, you don't get nearly as much um, manipulation of the wing when it's up on your shoulders.
Okay. That's interesting. That's so cool. All right.
Yeah, it's pretty dope, man. It's fantastic. I love it. After skydiving for quite a while, I mean, like I was on the same parachutes from 2017 until I got my Mutant last year, and those parachutes were like an extension of my body. And after I put them on the Mutant harness, it was like learning a whole new wing. It still is. You know, it's amazing. It's super fun.
Is it intuitive to fly the Mutant harness? Is it something that someone who has no like paragliding or no other experience just go straight to a Mutant from a regular vertical harness? Can you do that?
I think you can do that. Anything's possible with the appropriate training and education and that sort. I think it's much more difficult.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would not. I would not. I don't think that would be a thing.
And also, there's a requirement that if you're going to buy one of these harnesses, that you spend time with an approved coach.
Yeah,
through UPT.
You have to have, in order to actually even get one of these new supine harnesses, you have to fill out an application. On that application, you have to have 3 different references. They check out and vet those preferences, and then after that, you have to show like a commitment to training and further education. And then furthermore, included in the purchase of the container system is 2 days of training with an approved Mutant ambassador that kind of like walks you through all the nuances of the system, and helps you set up like a training regimen that'll help you like safely transition to that harness container system.
Yeah, that's cool.
Am I right that there's like a gentleman's agreement that you're not going to sell it to somebody else?
Yes, you can't sell it. It's very strict. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's still very much in the early phases. They've done a lot of hard work, and I mean the harness is amazing, but it's not something to be messed with by any means.
Yeah.
Not just handing it over to a buddy and saying like, great increase in performance, kind of like you would with a parachute. Like, oh yeah, try out my Velo. You're not like, oh, try out my Mutant. No, you're like, go take a course, and think about it for a while.
Well, it'd be like somebody riding, a cafe racer for 5 or 10 years and then jumping on a Hayabusa.
Yes.
And it's not like you don't just go jump on a Hayabusa, the fastest production bike in the world, and think that you're going to be okay with no experience on that type of thing.
Right. Chris, it scared the bejesus out of me. Yeah, it's super scary the first couple times.
Really?
Well, like to me, it looks super interesting for other people. I'm not going to competitive swoop anymore. I think it's fascinating to watch, and the power that's generated, the changes to the turn, it's frightened me when I first saw it because the recovery arc is different, and so from my perspective, it looks like the pilots are way too low, and then suddenly they come out with a ton of power and a ton of speed. But the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, okay. Okay, he's not dead, because it was so low that I was like, that can't be right. But judging from, if you look at the competitive swooping world, there's a lot of big names that are switching over to this harness, and I think that's a testament to it. It's worthwhile, but it is like, as a for instance, I have quite a few jumps. I would not probably just hook up a peregrine and go jump it without some instruction and a person who does canopy flying for a living helping me out. And I can't stress enough that the requirements that Jack's talking about and what the manufacturer wants you to do are absolutely critical, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's a young buck who will remain unnamed, who I've kind of like thrown some guidance at over the years. And a year ago, he was asking me if I would be one of his references for applying for the Mutant program. And like we had a long conversation, and I was like, "Well, cool. Tell me before I give you my blessing. Like, how many speed flying trips are you going on? When are you taking that next paragliding course?" And until I see those solidified, I'm not going to give you my thumbs up moving forward, because it's unbelievably important. It's just because of the way that you're suspended underneath the wing, there are new things that can happen that you can't achieve with a normal vertical harness. And understanding how a load behaves under a wing when it's suspended in that way is super important.
Can you fly it in the normal vertical orientation?
Yeah, so that's the super cool part about it is when you deploy from a regular BOC. It's essentially a normal UPT vector micron. And then you have a handle that's located on the right side of the system that allows you to release the upper three rings that are attached to your shoulders. And that cuts away into a riser cover system that's along your main lift webs. And when that riser cover system opens up, you're then suspended from your hip articulation rings, or by your hip articulation rings. And then that fun little seatbelt that JRuss was talking about is what actually opens up the harness and allows you to sit back into the supine position.
And is there something that keeps you from going back too far? Some suspension?
Yes, and the sizing of the harness. Yeah, you can't just like flip out of it. No, you think you're going to the first time that you jump it, and it feels that way, but no, it's not possible.
Yeah. So if you took the exact same wing and flew a regular harness, and then you put the exact same wing on you put a Mutant on it, is it how different are the flight characteristics going to be? Is it significantly different with the exact same wing?
Yeah. Just
so different.
Massive expansion. Yeah,
that's cool. That's very.
Yeah,
I'm
not going to throw arbitrary numbers out there because I'm a sight and smell kind of guy. I'm not running fly sites. I can't tell you how much my glide has increased or what my particular K factor is for this parachute that I'm on. But she whips and she nays, Chris. Much more than from a vertical harness.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so go for it, JRuss.
I just said, are there any drawbacks to the Mutant? Anything that
drawbacks
to sacrifice?
It's a much more complicated system. It's crowded, straight up. There's a lot going on. You'd have to see one to believe it, but a lot more going on the back end by the BOC. It's not the cleanest pole in the world, but it's manageable. Quite a bit more housekeeping when it comes to getting into that supine position, as far as getting yourself, like, you have a lot more tasks to complete before you're in that. If you have to cut away due to a major malfunction or a total malfunction, you're now having to release 4 3-ring systems rather than just 2 3-ring systems. Rather than just having 3 feet of cable, you have a lot of cable. And no RSL, no option for an RSL or skyhook. You can't have a barred.
Why is that?
Because of the way that the risers are hooked up to the container, and they have not yet developed a way to route a marred lanyard or an RSL lanyard that wouldn't interfere with the way that you deploy it into the supine position.
Gotcha.
So you got that going on, and then like I said, because of the way that you're flying, it's a paragliding harness, it's a speed flying harness, and you can get above the wing. So if you can get above the wing, that means you can be gift wrapped by your wing if you don't manage that energy appropriately. And then I think the conversation that intrigued JRuss the most is, and it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's talked about amongst people that fly the Mutant, but I don't know if it's talked about a lot. And like some people are like, yeah, that's a thing. And other people are like, no, it can't really happen. But there's this thing called spiral lock that you can achieve in a supine harness. And I mean, my opinion is you can actually achieve spiral lock on a regular vertical harness. And I think it does happen from time to time in our sport. It's just a lot easier to recover from. And it doesn't hold itself. It's not as truly locked in from a vertical harness. But on a supine harness, you can find yourself in a position where your nose, the nose of your wing, is flying directly at the ground and is parallel with the horizon while in a rotation. And because of the way that you're suspended from the wing and in the harness, you can actually get above the wing in the rotation, which is what keeps it in this locked out position. So kind of hard without visual representation for the people that are just listening, but for the people that are watching and listening, I'll try and describe it. So again, like if you picture you're looking out to the horizon in a canopy, we'll be flying straight at the ground so that from the nose to the tail of that canopy, it's perpendicular to the horizon, perfectly perpendicular in a zero pitch dive. And the pilot is above the horizon.
And where is that point, point of axis? Is it at your head? Is it in the middle of the lines? Is it at the
It's in the middle. It's like right in front of your body because your head's back. Because that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Like when you're in a vertical harness, your head's in the center of the rotation.
Okay.
But in these supine harnesses, you can get back, which is what makes it so deadly and why you can get locked out.
Wow.
And this is going into like science and voodoo magic, and we'd have to have like some hardcore paraglider here to describe it properly. But if I remember correctly, essentially the wing has achieved such speed and tension and efficiency through its dive that the load and the drag created from the pilot keeps it in that diving orientation, not allowing it to recover and the pilot to get underneath the load. And then centrifugal force comes into play, similar to if you were to like put your hand on a basketball net pole and swing yourself around it, your momentum would come to a stop pretty quick. But then if JRuss and I were to grab hands and swing each other and lean back against each other's force, we'd stay in a rotation for a much longer period of time.
Yeah. Isn't there I've seen some videos of paramotorists, maybe free flyers too. Isn't there a move where they do that on a paramotor?
Yeah, so spiral lock, so
it has a name for that move. I can't.
Yeah, like a spiral lock is an acrobatic maneuver that people will intentionally put themselves in, but they won't allow the G's or the rotation to achieve a rate that keeps them locked in that position. And those pilots that do that maneuver have trained a series of other maneuvers leading up to that make it so they can exit it comfortably, even if they get in a locked out position.
Okay.
But it takes a lot of time to be at a point where, while experiencing that many G's and that much chaos, you can actually do what you're supposed to do and not just freak out.
Yeah. It sounds like, trying to picture in my mind, kind of like videos of where high performance canopy, like severe line twist, and that canopy just diving and spiraling to the ground. And it just, I mean, you got a guy just flat out, like the video that we
spiral
watched.
lock as well. That would be,
Okay.
we would call that spiral lock. Yeah. Like sometimes I actually like, this is just my worthless opinion. So like this would be like, take it with a grain of salt, but diving line twists, like sometimes diving line twists, there's an asymmetric component. And as far as like how the risers are loaded, and that's where the dive comes from. But I do think you can be symmetrically loaded in the harness and be stuck in a spiral on a high performance parachute. And in fact, it can happen with tandems. It can happen with a 150 and it can happen with a 190. I guarantee if you go out there in the skydiving community and you like talk around enough, you'll eventually find a person who will describe a scenario where they opened up and their canopy immediately started diving to the right and they thought it was tension knots and they just cut away, but it wasn't in fact tension knots. And it was just the fact that through the deployment process and the inflation, that canopy was able to dive aggressively enough at the ground, putting the load in the canopy far enough away and a horizontal from a horizontal standpoint to lock it into that spiral.
Yeah.
So in paragliding, if you are under like a novice wing, it's recommended that one way to exit a spiral lock is to let it fly and put the hands all the way up. But that's because those wings are specifically designed to recover from stalls or less than ideal scenarios. That's why they are beginner wings. Within paragliding, you have the EN class. So you have A, B, C wings, and you have like a high A or a low B or high B. Obviously, low A being the easiest wing that you would learn on if you don't have any skydiving or paragliding experience. And then maybe a high C wing being the wing that you're talking about where you're seeing the guys intentionally putting that spiral lock in.
So with
So
the
on a beginner wing, it would be hands up and it should just recover, or opposite input and it will recover from that spiral, which is why on a tandem canopy or a 190 where someone would experience spiral lock, if they just let their hands up, it will recover. Or if they unstow their toggles from that half brake stowed position, it will recover. However, the wings that most people are flying in Mutants are not going to be beginner wings. They're all going to be high C, D, E, F, mega G wings, So as far as them recovering on their own from a hands up standpoint, I think the mutineer community should expect that to not be something to work at all. And then also from the paragliding world, on beginner wings, if you're in a spiral lock scenario, they say that you can exit with opposite input. So if the rotation's to the right, slight left control line input followed by maintained inside input to bleed off the energy of the turn and exit the lock is the way to do it. But again, the wings that most people are flying with Mutants, I don't think are beginner wings. So they are not going to exit from outside toggle input.
So Jack brought this up some time ago when we were working together, and I had no idea, to be honest, what he was talking about. And I've done a little bit of speed riding. I wouldn't say that I'm extensively experienced, but I did 3 weeks of it in France a while back. And I'm sure that I was on a somewhat beginner wing, even though the guys that were teaching me I had a lot of jumps and so a lot of parachute experience, canopy experience, and I've been skiing my whole life. So that the 6-day course, they let me go after 2, but I heard none of this, and I assumed that it could have happened to me because the setup is very similar for speed riding. And so when Jack brought it up, I thought, that as a personal experience, I didn't know that this was a thing, and we're going to show a video here in a little bit that is not a great experience for the person who had the situation. And so then I went home to Scottish Chicago, and there's a couple of guys that are jumping mutants there. And I said, hey, have you heard about this? Both of them just blank stares. No, haven't heard of it. Oh, well, I feel like you should hear about it. If you're jumping these canopies, and I don't think it's necessarily a deficiency in like any one person, that this should be information given, say, from the manufacturer, or the manufacturer can only do so much. But I do think that in the community, it would be good, for this to be readily available, so that people who are interested in it can at least be aware of it. Not only that, but the way that Jack described the mitigation, if you get into that scenario, it didn't sound exactly intuitive, at least not to my ears. No. It was actually kind of counterintuitive what you need to do. Right then I thought, well, I need to get the basics of this to the people that are at Scottish Chicago, that are friends of mine who are not aware of this issue. So I asked Jack to send me that. But then in addition to all the illustrious information that Jack has, and of course the flowing hair, I wanted to make sure that we got this discussion going for the people who might download this and have some interest in that. So I wanted to make sure that we covered this situation from an educational standpoint.
Yeah, because that's dude, one of the best parts about working with JRuss over the last couple of years is especially the group that we're fortunate enough to get to work with, is I think, safety is an ongoing conversation. And one of the coolest parts about work is we're constantly walking up to each other with just rogue scenarios. What do you think of this? What would you do in this scenario? Because that's something that I think is missing from our sport a lot, and is super important. You don't want to sit there. I'm not telling you to sit there at the drop zone on the couch and be like, we're so hardcore, we're cheating death, at any point in time. This malfunction could happen. No shit, your lines could just explode, But no, I think it is super healthy to sit down and just be what are you doing for pilot chute hesitation? You know what I mean? Because or asking questions. It's super funny to me, how many questions as an AFF instructor that I give to students, because that's just baseline. And with students, we just give them baseline number and responses. And the intent is for those numbers and those responses to evolve and change as that person grows within the sport. But then I'll ask people with, 3,000 jumps, what their decision altitude is. And they'll be 2,500 feet. And I'll be like, well, didn't you just pull at 3,000 feet on that last jump? And weren't you saddled in at 2,400 feet? So how can your decision altitude be 2,500 feet if you're already past it? That the number actually goes down when you start pulling lower, in case anybody's listening didn't know it. That's why we have a difference between a decision altitude and a hard deck, and so I think these conversations are super important to happen for just everyday, anybody who's skydiving, in any harness container system. But I think they're even more important to happen with anybody who's flying a mutant, because you don't know what you don't know till you don't know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
JRuss was just telling us about a scenario where he didn't know what he didn't know until he got home and had a conversation with me about it. And then it was oh,
I should have known that.
Yeah, spiral lock is a thing. Maybe. And I think the reason why subjects like spiral lock might not be discussed is because when you are teaching somebody something, they only have so much bandwidth, and you have to choose. Getting back to the beginning question that you asked me, expectations. Maybe this is expectations as an instructor. What can we expect our student to absorb when we're hanging out with them?
Yeah.
Maybe spiral lock and adverse yaw, or these other nuances that come from a supine harness, is something where it's we don't have the bandwidth to discuss that right now. But that's where, to me, it's on the pilot to be further educating themselves. And I think that doesn't even happen in skydiving outside of mutant jumpers as well. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Were you part of the scuba diving conversation that we are having today?
No.
Okay. So for me, this is skydiving is life-saving equipment, right? We're putting on something because we're entering an environment that we cannot survive unless we have properly maintained equipment that is used the way it is designed and intended. Scuba diving is the same way. Anybody who has their scuba diving license, I know that I can hand them a BCD, a regulator, and a tank, and they're going to put it together. Even like the most bare bones basic scuba diver. If I hand a main canopy and a disconnected container system to jumpers, I'm disappointed at how many can't confidently put together a 3-ring and assemble it without fumbling their way through it, you know, or build a new closing loop, you know, or something as simple as that. Like, I think that's like important stuff, you know?
So, Chris, you have the video, and I think we can play it. And it's important, I think, always in these kind of scenarios to say that the gentleman in the video survived this thing because it's definitely questionable when you watch the video. He didn't do well, but he survived through it. And obviously, the intent of showing it is to hopefully illustrate in concrete terms the verbiage that Jack used, the story that he told about this locked scenario, and hopefully, because we had a whole podcast with a friend of mine, Justin, who is a PhD in education systems, about the efficacy of showing video of basically bad scenarios in a teaching environment, and there's an ongoing discussion about, does it work? Is the effect lasting? And one of the things that Andy Malchiotti was kind enough to share some thoughts with me about that exact issue. Should we show videos when things go wrong? And his words were great, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it was basically that you need the video to connect the theoretical with the concrete or the practical. And a lot of times when you just discuss the theoretical, like I've seen the video, and I've heard this explanation by Jack a couple of times, and I'm still not 100% sure that I understand. But I think that watching the video made it at least more clear for me, the words that he shared. So without further ado, if it's okay, we'll go ahead and, can we put that up?
Yeah. Before I play the video, Jack, can you describe what is going to happen? So people watching the video, they tell us what we're going to see, then I'll play it, so they know beforehand what it's going to show us.
In a supine harness, it's a lot more important to be deliberate and controlled in your weight shift and your control line input when you're entering spirals. So this person mismanages the weight shift and toggle input combination, and as a result puts themselves into a very steep locked out spiral very, very quickly.
And is this a mutant harness that they're using, or is this just a regular?
No, so this is not a mutant harness. This is a speed flying harness. But a speed flying harness is the same sort of position and concept as a mutant harness. And so I should have called Patrick before I did this. I think Patrick might have experienced. I have a dear friend of mine, Patrick Kessler. He's been flying mutant harness from like day one when it came out. Very, very, very experienced speed flyer, super talented canopy pilot, and he was in a locked out scenario. I think he was in spiral lock in Hawaii at one point in time. Other than that, I haven't heard of anyone who's experienced it. I did find myself in a less than ideal situation with a mismanaged roll on my mutant that I had to recover from that felt quite similar to spiral lock. Yeah, so again, the discussion, we haven't seen this in the sport or nobody's come forth with it, but it's something that people need to be aware of that can happen. Because I think that's getting back to what JRuss was saying, is if you're not aware it can happen, then you can't be looking out for it. And if you're not looking out for it, then you might get blindsided by it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So when
All right.
people watch it, they're pretty much going to see this person enter a hard right toggle input. And while doing that, they allow their legs to swing to the left in their weight shift. And it puts the canopy or the speed wing in a very, very steep attitude very quickly. And he achieves a lockout scenario where you'll see him above the horizon and above the wing, or I guess it's a left roll.
Hmm.
All right, I'm gonna back it up, and you can tell me if you want me to pause it at any point.
Yeah, I mean, if you buffering on our end, but if you try and grab it at the end, like right before he impacts, you might be able to see where you can see the tail of the canopy and the horizon.
So, I mean, right there, is it paused for you guys?
Difficult. That's what I was saying earlier. This is difficult because it's a 360 footage, so the perspective is a little bit skewed, so you can't see. Right now, it looks like he's very much above the wing, like doing a roll, but that's not actually what's happening here. He's actually entering a dive. So, yeah, if you play it and pause it again real quick, you might be able to start to see it.
So at the point that we're at, Chris, and Jack's right that it's we're on a satellite internet, so it's not coming through as crisp as it might otherwise. But his legs are on the outside of the turn, so the weight is
So he's pulling.
So and he can't get that weight back underneath the wing.
Can you play the video again there, Chris, from the start?
Yeah, from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the buffing.
Yeah,
the buffing is frustrating. Yeah, but long story short, like for anybody who watches that video or they can see it, like pretty much what you're looking at is you have the horizon, right, which is like that nice straight line, and then you have your canopy's nose, and the closer that nose comes to meeting parallel with the horizon, the greater the risk of being in a spiral lock is.
Mm. So you haven't experienced this with the Mutant harness, and you haven't talked to anyone that's experienced it either.
No.
But
I mean, he just mentioned Pat Kessler.
Yeah.
Who's a very
yeah.
Super.
Yeah. Patrick was in a pretty bad scenario, where he was actually like, so the other thing with the spiral lock scenario is the G's are immense, you know? So in paragliding, that's what you're trying to stay ahead of, you know, like if you're taking a paragliding SIV course, which is a simulated incidents course where they're teaching you how to deal with these shitty situations, they say that like you have to acknowledge like I'm about to G out, you know, like I'm about to black out from the G's because of what's going on. And that's when you need to throw your reserve out in a paragliding scenario because there's no cutaway, or there are cutaways on some new paragliding systems, but for the most part, you're not cutting away from a paraglider. So even if you are in a locked out spiral and that paraglider is a perfectly good wing, it's just tomahawking towards the ground, you're just throwing your reserve parachute out into the relative wind. In skydiving, we would cut that main parachute away. However, that G force greatly increases the effort that's needed to release the 3-ring system and actually pull that handle, and overcome the resistance and the friction of the cables moving through the housings and passing through the locking loop and all that other resistance, where in a paragliding scenario, you're just throwing a round reserve out there that's fairly easy to access, even in a high G scenario. And because of the way that parachute inflates and flies, like it doesn't matter how it hits the wind. It's just happy days and it's good to go. And you're going to float down underneath it all accidental. Like, well, obviously if you're in a locked out G spiral, a less than ideal thing to do would be to just dump your reserve out in that spiral, because a ram air square main is just going to spin up or entangle and downplane.
Yeah.
So again, I think in a mutant, you're going to have to get out of that spiral lock, and it seems to be that the method for getting out of that is get underneath that wing. You are not underneath that wing. That wing is, you're under, it feels like you're underneath that wing because you have line tension, but you are out from that wing. That wing is diving at the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And you are on the same level as that wing. You need to be underneath the wing on a different level. So you would achieve that by pulling down on both control lines very deep. So like, even to the point of maybe stalling the canopy.
Yeah. In my mind, I kind of equated this to the scenario that a lot of skydivers have heard about, where if you have a two canopy out situation, you need to make sure that your reserve has not deployed through the risers of the main, which is admittedly not very common. But if it happens and you see risers crossing each other, as opposed to just risers being open to each other or away from each other, you may not cut that away. Because what's going to happen is your main's going to just crawl up the top of your reserve lines and then snuff out your reserve. And so, even though it doesn't happen very often, just hearing about the scenario or knowing that that is a possibility, you have a better chance of surviving it if you're the one in 100,000 people who have that, or whatever the stats actually are. And I know two people that have had it happen, and one of them is Mike McGowan, who's pretty famous free fall photographer, and I think he reposted the video recently, and he survived it. His main.
Yeah, I did see him post that recently.
Yeah,
it was in cross keys.
Yeah,
the 2 hour.
Yeah, and his main went up there, but didn't completely choke off his reserve, and he survived. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, and the noises Mike made in the video when he hit the trees didn't sound very good, but he's still with us. And then the other one is a guy, Jim Cowan, who works with us. Who's actually, Jim's been on the show with us. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Oh, that's right. I listened to that episode.
Yeah,
as well.
And Jim's an incredibly experienced canopy relative work flyer and canopy pilot, and I don't remember what he said, 25 or 26,000 jumps, and he did have that happen. And the story is chilling. I mean, he was about to cut away and then didn't, because he had a feeling. He didn't even realize it was going on. He just had tingles on the back of his neck, like, I'm going to cut away, and then
Spider sense.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to cut away. Oh no, I need to cut away. Oh, I don't feel like cutting away. And then he landed 2 out, and everybody said, "Why didn't you cut away?" And he's like, "My risers. I would have died." Yeah. So anyway, that in my mind, it's it's not a very high probability scenario, but it's out there and it's possible. And so for people who are flying mutants, I don't think that, to be honest, I don't think this is going to clear everything up. Like, for the people who are out there who are flying a mutant, or maybe your friend's flying a mutant, or your partner, or something like that, I just think, again, awareness of the issue, maybe watching this episode, seeing the video, and then finding a chat forum, which I think exists for mutant flyers, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What is it? Do you know what
There's a Facebook group.
Facebook group for mutant flyers. Yeah. Just having the conversation of, hey, this can happen, and a little bit of knowledge can go a long way in that scenario. If you're at, I mean, the guy that we watched in the video is I'm imagining just hundreds of feet above the ground. But, if you're a skydiver and you're a few thousand feet off the ground, then you've got a little bit more time to deal with it. Not that you want to delay, I'm sure, because the G's are going to be detrimental to your health. But just, again, I just thought it was important for people to know about.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And like you said, the intention is not necessarily to solve. It's not a problem. It's just an issue. When you're dealing with high performance stuff, you got to deal with more issues. So you need to know about it. But it also goes back to, what you were saying earlier, Jack, about, as students, our ability to retain an amount of information is limited. I may have heard multiple times about, these cross riser thing, but why is it sticking in my head now, this time that you're saying it, JRuss? I've heard it multiple times, and this is the time that hopefully it's going to stick, so that if it ever does. So just repeating this stuff, sharing, like you're saying, Jack, asking each other questions at the drop zone. What are you going to do for this? What are you going to do for this? And not trying to prove that I know more or gotcha, or, make you feel dumb, but to help us be better, help us be safer, help us be more knowledgeable. And
I think like based off of what you were just saying, Chris, like what jumped out to me is like you were saying stick, and then you also said understand, and I think that's it. I think stuff sticks pretty quick. You know what I mean? Like, what's your decision altitude? 2,500 feet. Like things stick pretty quick, but it's like explain the process of how we got there. The understanding isn't there.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly trying to understand more, I think that's good. And for anybody that is listening or watching that's flying a Mutant, it's like, dude, paragliders have been doing it for a lot longer than we have. Speed flyers have as well. Go watch some YouTube videos. Just look up spiral lock. You know what I mean? There's a couple different videos on YouTube that'll explain it. You can see it. Oh, wow. That's exactly what it is. Look at that. Hands up. Nothing's happening, but the wing is still just tomahawking towards the ground. Both control lines pull it down and it gets underneath the wing. All right, cool.
Yeah.
And then it's a whole nother thing to when you are in the Thunderdome dancing with the devil himself to remember to actually do the right thing, right?
Man.
There was a car commercial back in the day that you just reminded me of. It's this guy, like he's at the wheel and he's got this real ponderous, like, what was that traction control system that I saw?
Oh yeah,
Volkswagen. And then the camera pans out and he's in the car just doing a complete 360 on ice. Like, just, I wonder why. Yeah, a little bit of knowledge in those moments can go a long way.
Well, it's that time again. You've done it again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour listening to the Crave Show with JRuss, JRuss, Chris, and the one and only Jack Lang with those beautiful flowing locks, as JRuss said.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here.
Jack back on in the future. He already agreed.
Oh, he agreed to it. Okay.
There's a lot more things we can
let's get it on camera. Let's get it on camera. Jack, will you come back at some point?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Cool.
We won't hold you to it.
These together, I'll rub them in.
Yeah. No, seriously, thank you so much, Jack. Really, it means a lot to us.
Automated activation devices, how they really work and what's going on your back.
Ooh. Okay. I like that.
Yeah. Real quick, did you know that the reason why your Cypress and your AAD is where it is in your container system is because originally the guy who invented it had to hide it in the rigs because people wouldn't let him jump it at the drop zones?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So the inventor of the automated, this is the next episode, but imagine this. How awesome is this? Get into a sport, your friend dies, you create a device that would have saved his life, and you want to implement it into the sport. Nobody wants to put it into the sport because they think it's hocus pocus and it's going to cause more harm than good. And so you have to start hiding it inside the rig. So that's why AADs are in such inconvenient places. Well, I mean, to my knowledge, that's why originally they were in such inconvenient places, because they didn't want them to be on the outside, because you didn't want people to know you had it in your rig. Because some drop zones wouldn't let you jump it. But
interesting.
Okay, for now.
And now,
next time.
And now we're all rogues.
Yeah.
That's right. Well,
thanks, Chris.
If you're listening to this show, I hope you've learned something. I hope it's been good for you. Bless you. Keep you safer. Get out there in the sky. Have fun. Enjoy jumping with your friends. Be safe. And we'll see you next time. Crave. Do more. Be better. JRuss, thank you. Jack, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.